Greetings to my dear guests on this video. I wish you a pleasant viewing and look forward to your feedback in the comments.
When you've been in a company for nearly 2 decades, you start to believe you've seen it all. Budget cuts, mergers, policy overhauls, and more management changes than anyone cares to count. But nothing prepared us for the arrival of Ethan Crane. It started with a board meeting none of us were invited to. The following Monday, Alan Whitaker, our CEO for over 15 years, didn't show up. Instead, we got a company-wide email announcing a strategic leadership transition. No farewell party, no words of gratitude. Just like that, Alan was gone. Ethan Crane arrived 2 days later. He was in his mid-30s, tall, sharply dressed, with a smile that never touched his eyes. Rumors swirled before he even stepped into the building. He had corporate investors behind him. He'd written a best-selling leadership book. He consulted for international conglomerates. What we quickly discovered was that Ethan loved change, the kind that made people nervous. At his first staff-wide meeting, he talked about streamlining inefficiencies, upgrading culture, and eliminating legacy structures. Nobody clapped. From the start, he moved like he already owned the place, renaming departments, revising long-standing procedures, and calling team leaders into meetings where he lectured rather than listened. He preferred people with titles, degrees, and buzzwords, not those with field-tested experience. One of his first changes was to make every manager rewrite their departmental objectives using a metrics-forward language no one understood. He had us drop trusted vendors we'd worked with for years in favor of new ones his own contacts recommended. Costs went up. Quality dropped. He dismissed objections with a condescending smile and phrases like, "We must break old habits to build new successes." He didn't take time to understand the business. He didn't walk the production floor or ask what we did. He just assumed he already knew better. Meetings grew longer and less productive. People started whispering after hours in hallways and by the coffee machine. One by one, key staff began calling in sick or requesting transfers, and yet Ethan remained oblivious, or maybe he just didn't care. He introduced open office seating, removed personal desk items to foster neutrality, and canceled long-standing department traditions, calling them distractions from core value delivery. We weren't a family anymore. We weren't even a team. We were now a portfolio of resource units. And just like that, the heart of Brighthold Industries started to slow down. The day Alan Prescott called me into his office, I knew something was off. It wasn't the meeting itself. Executives summoned department heads all the time. It was the tone of the email. Short, no subject, no details, just a line. "Come to my office, 9 a.m. sharp." That and the fact that I hadn't spoken to him directly since he arrived 3 weeks ago. When I walked in, Alan didn't even look up. He was staring at a large screen mounted behind his desk, watching some glossy corporate presentation on mute. Pie charts floated next to smiling employees in sleek offices. It looked like an ad for a startup that had never shipped a product. "Marcus," he said finally, gesturing toward the chair across from him. "Sit." I did. "I've reviewed the departmental data," he began. "Your team leads the company in delivery precision, cost control, and vendor satisfaction. That's noteworthy." I didn't reply. I've learned the hard way that when a boss opens with a compliment, it's almost always a prelude to bad news. He clicked off the screen and turned to face me. "But results are only half the story. This company is evolving and leadership needs to reflect our future. We're polishing the executive image." I frowned. "Meaning what, exactly?" "Meaning we're bringing in someone more aligned with our vision to lead your division." My hands clenched on my lap. "I built that division." "Yes," he nodded without a trace of hesitation. "But you didn't finish college. Our stakeholders prefer a certain pedigree, MBAs, institutional recognition, polished profiles. You're good with systems, Marcus, and very competent. That's why I've reassigned you. To where? He leaned back. You'll be my executive secretary. You already know the company well. You're discreet. You'll manage my calendar, communications, scheduling. I didn't speak for several seconds. I just looked at him, stunned. You're serious? He smiled thinly. Secretary is the perfect job for someone with your skills. It's a position of trust. I wouldn't give it to just anyone. I stared at the man across from me, 35, freshly imported from the East Coast, hair too perfect, shoes too clean. He had no idea what this company really was. He only saw what it looked like on paper. You're replacing me with someone because they have a degree? Alan's smile didn't falter. It's business, Marcus. You understand? Yes, I understood. I stood slowly. You'll need luck, I said. With the Lambert contract, it goes live next week. He blinked. That's been handed over already. I gave a small nod. Right. Best of luck. I left the room with my spine straight, even though I felt like I was being led out of my own house. They had already boxed up my things. My new desk was on the executive floor, tucked into a corner between the boardroom and the copy room. No windows, no nameplate, just a recycled phone and a computer missing half the software I used to build. I sat there most of the day, replying to calendar invites, booking lunch meetings, reading memos that had nothing to do with real work. I kept my tone polite. I didn't raise my voice or send bitter messages. I was no longer the head of anything. But I knew something Alan didn't. That Lambert contract. It wasn't just another delivery. It was a 6-month multi-tier supply chain with staggered fulfillment, coordinated across 3 different logistics firms. I had designed it myself, and I had done it in a way only I could explain. But I wasn't in logistics anymore, and I wasn't going to explain a thing. It didn't take long for the wheels to start wobbling. By the end of my first week in the corner office outside the boardroom, the one with the buzzing fluorescent light and a door that wouldn't close properly, I had fielded half a dozen phone calls that should have gone to logistics. Vendors calling to ask why payments were delayed. A subcontractor in Ohio demanding clarification on delivery specs. A junior analyst trying to locate the Lambert fulfillment sequence and panicking when they couldn't. I didn't answer the questions. I took notes, forwarded calls, smiled politely, even when I was gritting my teeth. I was a secretary now, remember? Protocol said I couldn't interfere in departments where I no longer held authority. And so I didn't. But I listened. I paid close attention to the tone in people's voices. I noticed the shift in the office energy, once sharp and rhythmic, now jagged and strained. The new logistics director, some clean-cut 20-something named Fletcher with 2 degrees and 0 experience, walked the hallways with a confused expression, carrying around printed reports he didn't understand and scheduling meetings to explain things to himself. He hadn't asked me for help, not once. Maybe pride, maybe fear, or maybe Alan had warned him off. Wouldn't surprise me. Alan, for his part, had his eyes on a quarterly investor briefing. He was preparing slides, hosting marketing walkthroughs, and working with consultants on future-facing narratives. Every time I passed him something he asked for, he said, "Thanks, Marcus," like nothing had ever happened between us. But I wasn't interested in his words anymore. I had work to do. Not the kind he assigned me, the kind I knew had to happen if Brighthold was going to survive this. So I started building my own system again. Not for them, for me. Each time a call came in that exposed a flaw, I noted it. Each missing file, logged. Each delivery mix-up, tracked. I created my own unofficial crisis map of the Lambert operation, day by day. I could see the pattern forming. Things were sliding, and they were sliding fast. I knew that contract inside out. I had designed it so that no single change could collapse it. But if you didn't understand the sequencing, If you altered timelines or ignored dependencies, it would cascade. A week later, delays would start. 2 weeks, and penalties would hit. By week 3, the client would start pulling resources. And then, termination clauses. No one in that office knew that, except me. And that's why, despite everything, I didn't feel weak in that smaller chair. I felt patient, because deep down, I knew Alan could put someone else in my office. He could take my title. He could strip my authority, but he couldn't replace me. Not really. Not when things actually needed to work. He had removed me thinking I was a cog in the machine, but he forgot. I had built the machine, and now it was running without its mechanic. Monday morning, a senior analyst knocked on my door with a nervous smile. "Sorry to bother you, Marcus, but do you happen to remember if the Lambert units scheduled for early September were going to be stored off-site or routed to DC3? I looked at him calmly. "That's a question for Fletcher." He scratched the back of his head. He wasn't sure. He asked me to check with you. "Tell him it's in the operations binder," I said. Section 6. I didn't mention that Fletcher wouldn't even know what the operations binder looked like, that it was still sitting in a locked cabinet he didn't have the key for, that it was labeled in a filing system I'd created without ever documenting it. He'd find out, or he wouldn't. That wasn't my job anymore. The storm arrived on a Thursday morning. It came not with thunder, but in an email. Subject line: urgent, priority order confirmation, Calder project. My name wasn't anywhere on it, but my fingerprint was all over the work. The Calder project was another high-stakes client deal, multi-phase, sensitive to timeline, involving a delicate coordination of custom components from 2 international suppliers and 3 domestic warehouses. I'd scoped it, prepped it, and even pre-negotiated the pricing model with our partner vendors before Alan took over. It was supposed to be my next big task. Now, I was only watching. From across the office, I could hear rushed voices through the frosted glass walls of the new logistics director's meeting room. Fletcher was trying to pull together a delivery schedule while 2 analysts flipped through spreadsheets I knew didn't hold the full picture. The Calder project didn't just need precision. It needed foresight, built into every level of the plan. They had none. I listened quietly as Alan called down the hallway asking someone to double-check whether we've confirmed the tooling shipment for the second assembly phase. It hadn't been confirmed, because the tooling vendor required a lead time of 22 business days, something I had already worked around in my original plan, but something the new team clearly didn't know. An hour later, I overheard Fletcher telling the purchasing lead that we'll just expedite it if it comes to that. I smiled slightly. You don't just expedite tooling with proprietary specifications from a vendor that only fabricates in monthly batches. The cost of expediting alone would shatter the project's margin, and if it was unavailable, the entire order would stall. But again, I said nothing. It was strange, sitting at my desk with a full view of what was about to go wrong, and knowing I had no authority to stop it. My job now was to schedule meetings and fetch coffee when the board came to visit, not solve logistics crises. That was someone else's job now, and they weren't ready. Late in the afternoon, an email came through from one of our warehouse coordinators, a guy I used to mentor, actually. Subject: Calder prep questions. Can we talk? He must have thought I was still in my old role. I clicked reply and hesitated. Then I deleted the draft. I couldn't help them. Not under this title. Not without stepping out of line. And if I did, Alan would see it not as loyalty, but as insubordination. I looked up from the screen just in time to catch Alan walking past, smiling tightly as he took a call on his headset. "Yes, we're moving aggressively on Calder," he said confidently. "It's under control." He glanced in my direction, gave a slight nod, maybe even smug, and continued walking. He thought he'd proven something. Maybe he thought by removing me and keeping the gears turning, he'd confirmed what he believed all along, that I was just a replaceable part in a bigger machine. What he didn't realize was that the Calder project required a foundation that hadn't even been handed over. Vendor-specific clauses, time zone conversion buffers, the penalty risk on delivery slippage. It wasn't in the slides. It wasn't in the polished spreadsheets. It was in my head. In years of experience, no one had asked me to transfer, because no one thought they needed to. By Friday, Fletcher was sending meeting invites marked Calder contingency options. The cracks were widening, and I was still sitting in the same chair, still taking notes, still silent. But deep down, I was beginning to understand something else. The very work they had taken from me was going to come back and expose just how dependent they were on someone they had discarded, and I wouldn't need to say a word to make that happen. On Monday morning, a sharp knock rattled my office door before it swung open. Alan didn't wait for an invitation. "Marcus," he said, stepping inside, "get a call scheduled with Calder Group for this afternoon, 2 p.m., their time." I nodded. "Do you want anyone else in the meeting?" He paused, distracted. "Just Fletcher and myself. Legal doesn't need to be there. It's just a check-in, nothing major." But I saw it in his eyes. Something was off. 15 minutes later, a confidential internal message hit Alan's inbox, one he accidentally left open when he went to grab coffee. I wasn't snooping. I just saw the subject line. Client request. Advanced delivery feasibility. Phase 1 Calder. I sat back in my chair. That wasn't just a check-in. Calder Group was asking for the first delivery window to be moved up by 9 days. That alone would have been enough to scramble most logistics departments. But this wasn't most logistics departments. This was Brighthold post-restructure, where files were misplaced, vendor contacts had been switched, and planning assumptions were loosely interpreted by people who read numbers but didn't feel them. 2 hours later, I watched through the glass wall as Alan and Fletcher sat across from each other, both looking stiff and unusually quiet. No smiles. No confident pacing. Fletcher's notepad was blank. Alan's laptop stayed closed. By 3 p.m., I knew things hadn't gone well. Alan stormed out first, clutching a file and muttering under his breath. He didn't even glance at me. Fletcher followed a minute later, heading straight to the elevator without saying a word. I opened my inbox. A message was waiting. Subject: Calder. Immediate resource audit required. From Alan Prescott. To all department heads. He was panicking, but hiding it behind corporate language. An emergency audit? That was damage control. That meant Calder didn't buy their promises. I got up, walked to the break room, poured a cup of stale coffee, and returned to my desk just in time to hear the first ripple of anxiety hit the office. 2 team leads were discussing timelines in hushed voices. One of them, Jennings from procurement, looked like he hadn't slept all weekend. "The tooling's not ready," he said, "and if they're asking for early delivery, we're going to have to reroute the whole domestic chain just to clear a path. That's assuming Fletcher even knows how to open the planning suite." "You talked to Alan?" the other asked. Jennings shook his head. He said, and I quote, "Stay calm. We have it under control." And that was Alan's posture all week, smiling in front of stakeholders, speaking in short, confident phrases during meetings, dismissing concerns with a wave of his hand. "We'll adjust. We've got the resources." This is why we hired fresh blood. He wasn't managing the crisis. He was pretending it didn't exist. I knew why. This wasn't just about Calder. This was about pride. Alan had bet everything on being right, on showing the board he was smarter than his predecessor, that his vision of qualified leadership would elevate Brighthold into the modern era. But Calder's request had caught him mid-stride, and he didn't have the humility to admit he needed help, especially not from me. One afternoon, I passed by a closed-door meeting between Alan and two project leads. I paused just long enough to hear my own name mentioned. "Marcus would have had this done before it even became a problem," one of them said. "We're 3 weeks behind on work that didn't even exist on paper until he mapped it." "Marcus is not in logistics anymore," Alan replied, his voice sharp. "And if anyone's unclear on the new structure, they're welcome to review the org chart." That was his solution. Review the chart. Pretend the cracks weren't visible. Refuse to reach out to the one person who knew how to fix them. That night, I stayed late. Not because anyone asked me to, but because I wanted to see something. At 7:46 p.m., the Calder contact, Mark Reese, a man I'd known for 5 years, called Alan's direct line. Alan was gone for the day. Fletcher had already left, so the call rang to voicemail. Mark didn't leave a message. He called again 2 minutes later, and then he called my number. He hesitated when I answered. "Marcus?" "Yes." A pause. "Off the record, are you still involved in Calder?" "No. I'm the executive secretary now." "I didn't know that. Thought you were still—" "Anyway, sorry to bother you." He hung up before I could respond. But the message was clear. The client didn't trust Alan, and he didn't trust Fletcher. He trusted me, and I wasn't allowed to help. By the following week, it wasn't just cracks anymore. It was chaos. Emails were going unanswered, shipments were being misrouted, and a critical part of the Calder supply, precision machine components from a specialist in Indiana, had gone missing from the scheduling chart entirely. Not delayed, not rescheduled. Missing. Fletcher didn't even realize it until the vendor called to ask why no pickup had been arranged. I knew it would happen. I had flagged that vendor in my original documentation weeks before I was demoted. They required 2 confirmations, including a pre-delivery checklist that no one in Fletcher's team knew existed. On Tuesday morning, I arrived early. Habit never dies. And found 2 project coordinators arguing in the hallway outside Fletcher's office. "He told me it was cleared for processing," one snapped. "Well, it wasn't," the other said, waving a printed email. "Now the vendor says we've missed the production window. It'll take 3 weeks to rerun the batch. You tell Fletcher that. I'm not walking into that fire." The fire, as it turned out, had already spread. At 10:17 a.m., Alan received a direct call from Mark Reese at Calder. It lasted only 5 minutes, but when Alan emerged from his office, his face was pale. He didn't speak to anyone. He walked straight to the boardroom, pulled the blinds shut, and stayed there for the next 2 hours. By noon, the company was in full emergency mode. I sat at my desk, watching it unfold. Requests were flying back and forth. Call summaries, logistics audits, vendor contracts being re-reviewed as if that would somehow retroactively change the past. Alan's tone had changed. He was no longer calm, no longer brushing off concerns. I heard him barking into the phone. "We'll fix this, Mark. We're a little behind, but it's nothing we can't absorb." He was lying, and he knew it. They weren't behind by a little. They were off the rails. Every recovery plan was built on the assumption that nothing else would go wrong, but everything was going wrong. At 2:35 p.m., Mark Reese sent an email to the executive team. I wasn't copied, but someone left it open on the communal printer long enough for me to see it. "If delivery is not confirmed and met as adjusted, we will exercise our right to terminate per Section 4.3. This will include reimbursement for loss and cancellation of pending contracts. Consider this our final notice." Alan walked past me 20 minutes later, heading toward the conference room where the regional directors were waiting. He didn't look up. His hands were shaking. For the first time since his arrival, the shine was gone. The man who had smiled through every meeting, dismissed every warning, and confidently removed the very person who kept this company upright, was unraveling. And still, no one said my name. No one asked me to help, not yet. The worst part wasn't watching them panic. It was watching the younger staff, the ones who genuinely wanted to do good work, absorb the pressure of someone else's pride. They weren't trained for this. They were following orders, holding broken systems together with hope and coffee. In the break room, I overheard one of the junior analysts whisper to a colleague, "Why don't they just ask Marcus? He built half these contracts." The other shrugged, because Alan would rather crash than call for help. By Wednesday morning, Calder had frozen communications. They weren't replying to emails. They weren't taking phone calls. That's when Alan called an emergency meeting. He invited every senior manager, the heads of all departments, even legal. But not me. I booked the room, printed the packets, arranged the chairs, and then I closed the door behind them as they tried to figure out how to fix something they no longer understood. I sat outside that room for an hour, listening to muffled voices, raised tones, nervous laughter. At one point, Alan's voice rang through the wall. "We are not going to bring him in. This company will not become dependent on someone who doesn't meet our leadership standard. That's not the image we're building." That told me everything. Alan didn't care about results. He cared about perception, about the image of leadership, about prestige over performance, even if it meant losing everything. The door opened at 12:02 p.m. The group scattered in silence. No one made eye contact. Alan stayed behind, sitting alone in the conference room with his head in his hands. And I returned to my desk, opened a new document, and began drafting a personal log of every failure point in the Calder project timeline. Not to help them, not yet, but because I had a feeling the story wasn't over, and I was going to be ready when it finally cracked wide open. Thursday morning started the same way as every other for the past 6 weeks. Quiet, predictable, controlled. Except something had changed. Not in the workflow or operations. Those were still a mess. Not even in Alan. He still strutted through the office like nothing was burning. But something inside me felt different, like a line had been crossed. For weeks I told myself I'd endure it, that if I kept my head down, kept my dignity, the weight of their own incompetence would be enough. I didn't need revenge. I didn't need recognition. I only needed the truth to catch up with the lies. But there comes a moment when silence begins to feel like complicity. The turning point came when the board visited. They were supposed to be touring the new facility layout, Alan's idea, a rebranding effort to show that Brighthold was modernizing operations. Fletcher was asked to prepare a status update on Calder and Lambert. The moment I heard that, I knew exactly what was going to happen. Fletcher wasn't ready, not even close. He barely understood the systems. His department was running on crisis calls and borrowed time. And the numbers, those couldn't be polished anymore. Calder had begun withholding payments. Lambert had pushed its second phase fulfillment out by 3 months. Vendors were applying late fees and dropping priority tiers. Operations were leaking from every corner. Still, Alan had him stand before the board and present a slideshow filled with buzzwords and bar graphs. And I watched. I stood in the back, taking notes like a good secretary. I watched the finance director furrow his brow. The board chair exchange a look with another member. The COO sit rigidly as Fletcher stammered through a chart about supplier conversion metrics that didn't make sense. And I watched Alan, who never once flinched. Never once looked in my direction. Not even when one of the board members asked, "Didn't Marcus oversee this division for over a decade?" Alan smiled and replied, "Yes, but we've since aligned with more current leadership strategies." He said it like I was a past mistake they had already corrected. That was it. That was the moment I realized I had given them enough of my silence, enough of my patience, enough of my dignity. When the meeting ended, I returned to my desk and typed a letter. No drama, no anger, just facts. A simple 2-paragraph resignation. I printed it, signed it, and slid it into a sealed envelope. I didn't hand it in that day. Not yet. I wanted to do it on my terms, in a way that could not be spun or denied. Instead, I began clearing my digital footprint. I copied nothing. I deleted nothing. I simply logged out of every internal system and packed up my drawer. The next day, I came in dressed in a navy blazer and a crisp white shirt, something I hadn't worn since the restructure. I scheduled a meeting on Alan's calendar for 9:30 a.m. with a subject line that simply read, "Transition." He walked in 10 minutes late, coffee in hand, smiling like we were old friends. "What's this about, Marcus?" he said, settling into the chair across from me. I placed the envelope on the desk. "I'm resigning, effective immediately." He blinked, caught off guard for once. "You don't have to do that," he said quickly. "We're just hitting a rough patch. There are opportunities opening." "No," I interrupted calmly. "This isn't about opportunity. It's about integrity." He sat back. "You've got a chip on your shoulder because of the reassignment, I get it. But leaving now? That's not a smart move. Think of how it'll look." "Exactly," I said. "It will look exactly like what it is. A man leaving a company he no longer recognizes." He tried to regain footing. "Let's be practical. We can't just bring you back into your old role. It would confuse the hierarchy, undermine leadership. It's not about you. It's about structure." I stood. "You don't need to worry about the structure anymore, Alan. That's your house to keep standing now." He stayed quiet. I left the envelope on the desk and walked out. Through the office, past the desks I once helped organize, past the people who had silently cheered for me but couldn't say it aloud. When I reached the door, I didn't look back, because I knew what was coming next. And for once, I wouldn't be the one holding the mess together. I didn't expect the bitterness to stay with me, but it did. For a few days after I walked out of Brighthold for the last time, I told myself I'd let it all go, that I'd move on, sleep in, maybe even think about starting something new on my own terms. I had a modest savings account, a handful of consulting offers already trickling in through LinkedIn, and years of knowledge no spreadsheet could summarize. But the anger sat under my skin like an ember. It wasn't just the demotion, or the condescension, or even the fact that Alan tossed away a decade of work like it was nothing. It was that he didn't break. Not when Calder sent their final notice. Not when the board asked about my role. Not even when I handed in my resignation. He was still standing, still smiling in boardrooms, still bluffing through briefings like a man untouchable. Until I decided he wasn't. It started with a call to a trusted former supplier, one of the few who still reached out now and then to check in. His name was Russ. We'd worked together for 8 years. When I left, he called and said, "They don't know what they've done, Marcus." He was right. I didn't ask him to sabotage anything. I didn't need to. All I said was, "If Brighthold submits any new requests for rush delivery, you might want to double confirm where they're coming from." And then I sent the first order. It looked real, professional, same formatting I'd used for years, only slightly outdated in a way that made it seem rushed by someone in panic. The item? A misidentified part for a backup Lambert component, something that, if swapped incorrectly, would delay testing by at least 2 weeks. It wasn't dangerous. It wouldn't ruin anyone's career, but it would cause confusion, delay, frustration. Brighthold fulfilled it. 3 days later, I did it again. A second fake order routed through a subcontractor they used only sparingly. This one was for Calder, parts for Phase 2 labeled in the wrong sequence. The kind of error a real logistics director would spot immediately. Fletcher didn't. The company tried to fulfill the order until the subcontractor flagged the numbers. By the end of the week, Calder's legal team had sent a breach notice citing gross procedural negligence. I didn't smile. Not really. But I felt something close to relief. And then it happened. The internal memo. I didn't see it firsthand, but Russ sent me a screenshot. Subject: Organizational realignment. effective immediately. From Alan Prescott. To all staff, Fletcher was gone. Officially, it was a performance-related departure, but everyone knew. The new MBA golden boy who replaced me lasted 5 months before the crack swallowed him whole. Alan didn't apologize. He didn't address the failure. He simply promoted someone else, someone even younger from marketing of all places, to take over logistics in the interim. A junior-level manager with zero operational background now held the fate of Brighthold's 2 largest contracts. And Alan? Still pretending it was all going according to plan. Still no mention of me. That was the final spark. I began building a database. Not fake orders this time. Real ones. The ones that had been fulfilled under my systems, under my name, with full efficiency. I compiled timelines, email confirmations, shipment logs. I annotated the deviations that started the moment I was removed, linked outcomes to decisions Alan had made, and wrapped it into a 32-page summary. I didn't leak it. I sent it, anonymously, to 3 members of the board. And then I waited. The following Monday, Alan canceled his weekly company-wide meeting. That same afternoon, I received a call from an unknown number. I let it go to voicemail. "Marcus, this is Peter Lang from the board. I believe we should talk, privately." I listened twice before deleting it. No, I thought. Now you talk to my work, to the files, to the data you were too arrogant to understand. I wasn't coming back to clean up his mess. Let it fall. The voicemail from Peter Lang, the board member, sat on my phone for 2 days before I returned the call. Not because I wasn't interested, just the opposite. I wanted him to wait. When I finally picked up, Peter was brief but respectful. "Marcus," he said, "I'd like to meet in person, off the record. Are you available for coffee?" He named a neutral cafe halfway across the city. I agreed. We met the next afternoon. He was already seated when I arrived, wearing a charcoal gray suit that screamed corporate veteran and tapping away at his phone like a man with too many fires to put out. When he saw me, he stood, extended his hand. "Thank you for coming." I sat down, didn't order anything. He got straight to it. "You didn't send that dossier to embarrass anyone," he said. "You sent it because you care about the company." I stayed silent. Let him continue. "We've reviewed it, privately, among 3 members of the board. Your documentation is precise. Timelines match. Vendor trails are intact. And most importantly, the link between decision-making and outcome is indisputable." He paused. "You didn't exaggerate anything. You just told the truth." I nodded. Truth has a way of revealing itself. Eventually. Peter sighed. I wish Alan had understood that. I didn't respond. He leaned in slightly. "I'm not going to insult your intelligence by offering your old job back. Not yet. But I will tell you this. We're calling an emergency executive session, and Alan won't be invited." That caught my attention. "He's not CEO anymore?" I asked. "Not officially," Peter replied. "But when a company bleeds this much under a single hand, there comes a point where the board has to intervene. And that point," he looked at me, "was about 2 weeks ago. Your report was the final confirmation." There was a pause. Then he added, "We'll need someone to walk the investors through what happened, and more importantly, what comes next." I raised an eyebrow. "And you think that someone is me?" He offered a measured smile. "No one understands the bones of this company like you do, Marcus. And frankly, after what we saw, none of us trust anyone else to explain it clearly." I looked out the cafe window. Brighthold's headquarters was just visible in the skyline, tucked behind steel and glass. It used to mean something to me. A place I gave 13 years of my life to. A place that gave me a role, a mission, even a sense of purpose. Alan had tried to erase all of that with a single stroke of a pen. But bricks don't forget their builder. I turned back to Peter. "I'm not going to clean up Alan's mess." He nodded. "We don't expect you to. But if I return," I continued, It's not as someone who needs validation from titles or suits. I return on my terms, and I won't answer to anyone who values credentials over competence. He didn't hesitate. Agreed. I stood. Then you'll hear from me in 2 days. I'll let you know if I'm interested. That night, I sat in my apartment and opened a dusty folder. Inside were old sketches, flowcharts, and vendor maps, plans I once made to expand Brighthold's operations without inflating budget or risk. At the time, Alan called them overly technical. The board had never seen them. Now they would. But something inside me still held back, not out of bitterness, but clarity. This wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about restoration, reclaiming what had been broken, not just by one man, but by a system that valued image more than integrity. 2 days later, I returned to the Brighthold building, not through the employee entrance, but the boardroom elevator. When the doors opened, Alan was there. He hadn't been told. We locked eyes. For a moment, neither of us moved. "You," he said, his voice low. "Me," I replied. "You didn't think this was coming?" He stepped forward. "Whatever they're offering you, don't take it. You don't belong at that table." I smiled calmly. "That's what you said about my desk. And look how that turned out." The doors closed behind me as I walked into the meeting. It wasn't revenge. It was arrival. The boardroom was quiet when I entered. 7 members, each with a printed copy of the report I had compiled, some with notes scribbled in the margins. No one stood. No one clapped. This wasn't a celebration. It was a reckoning. Peter Lang nodded to the seat at the end of the table. "Marcus." I took it. No projector, no presentation, no coffee. Just a long, polished table and the weight of what this company had become. Peter cleared his throat. "We've made a decision. Alan Prescott's contract is being terminated, effective immediately." The vote was unanimous. The words hung in the air like a broken chain finally falling. Alan hadn't shown up. He didn't call in. The pride that once filled his stride was now a void the board no longer had patience for. "We're appointing interim leadership while we assess long-term options," Peter continued. "But we need someone to rebuild credibility with our clients, someone they already trust." He looked directly at me. I didn't speak right away. 13 years of work, of saving projects from collapse, of doing the right thing even when it wasn't recognized, all stripped away by a man who valued degrees more than integrity. And now that same system wanted me to save them. "I'll help," I said finally, "but not for a title." Peter nodded slowly. "Understood. I'm not here to be part of a structure that lets someone like Alan do what he did. If I'm going to put my name on this company again, we do it with values first. That means promoting based on merit. That means rebuilding the training pipeline. That means we stop calling image leadership." Several board members murmured in agreement. One even tapped his pen against the table thoughtfully. "I don't need to be called director of anything," I said. "But if I'm going to rebuild operations, I get to do it my way." There was silence, then a quiet consensus. "You'll report directly to the board," Peter said. "You'll have full discretion over logistics, training, and long-term vendor strategy. We'll issue the contract within 48 hours. I stood. "Good. Then let's start with the clients we almost lost." As I walked out of that room, I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't bitter. I was clear. The first day back, I didn't go to my old office. I went to the operations floor. The junior analysts who once whispered apologies in the hallway now smiled openly. A few clapped. One of them said, "Welcome back, sir." I shook my head. "Call me Marcus." We pulled the Calder account back from the edge, barely. Lambert was slower to repair, but the moment I reached out to their lead director personally, they agreed to meet. I brought with me revised flowcharts, updated vendor confirmation protocols, and, most importantly, an apology. I didn't throw anyone under the bus. I didn't tell the clients what happened behind the scenes. I just owned the work, and they respected that. Internally, things shifted, quietly, at first. Some managers left. Others asked to meet with me privately. I listened. I didn't lecture. I focused on rebuilding, not just operations, but trust. At one meeting, a younger employee nervously asked, "Is it true you don't have a degree?" I nodded. "That's true. But you run everything better than the people who do." I smiled. A degree is proof you learned something. Experience is proof you applied it. He wrote that down. Weeks passed. The company stabilized, and the board, to their credit, kept their distance, except to send a short note. "We see the difference already. Thank you." But I didn't do it for them. I did it because I couldn't walk away knowing that others like me, quiet, capable, overlooked, would be pushed aside just because someone in a suit thought they didn't look the part. Let this story be a warning to companies that confuse image with leadership, and a reminder that sometimes the people you ignore are the ones holding everything together. I never asked for revenge. All I ever wanted was for the work to matter again, and now it finally does.